on portion, I take it. Are we ready? Cool. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's City of Tumwater Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, February 28th, 2023 at 7 o'clock, and the meeting is called to order. Let's do roll call. Commissioner Edwards.
Present.
Here.
Here. Commissioner Tobias.
Here.
Great. Commissioner Varela is excused. Commissioner
Here.
Great. And me, Commissioner Robbins. Great. Forum. With a full house, so let's get rolling. Only change to our agenda tonight that I'm aware of is Brad would like to introduce between 8 and 9, items 8 and 9, a discussion of the roles between the Planning Commission and the Tree Board in response to, I think, the questions that we'll put it in there, and if I forget somebody. Oh. Any other changes? Two sets of minutes, one from November 8th of last year and one from January 24th last month. Motion for those? Approval? Well, then,
I'll second.
for both sets, I take it. That was it. All right, all in favor of approving both sets of minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes, then both sets are approved. Commissioner report. Does anybody want?
Not a commissioner report, but I just wanted to note the video has not started on the.
Oh.
Do we want to have the video recording or? All right. I'll start at the top of it. That's all right. We have the audio at least.
It looks like somebody, but that's her. Okay, were there other things people wanted to mention? Brad, manager's report.
Let me start first by introducing our new planner. Some of you are still already, and she's been here a little over a week, hasn't left yet, so.
Yeah.
Erica Smith-Erickson, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi there. I'm Erica. Last name is Smith-Erickson, but you could just say Smith if you want. I come from Thurston County. This is, about first week for me. I used to do current planning, so starting a new role at the city, working for Brad in Long Range. I look forward to getting to know you guys and working with you more. Nice to meet you.
Did you get to meet the far side of the table?
Nope.
Oh, Commissioner Kirkpatrick. Yep.
Brian.
Hi, Brian.
We're discussing public comment.
Okay, did I skip that?
Nope.
Okay. You didn't have anything else, I take it?
I just had a couple things. We had our first street tree stakeholder conversation last night. The second one will be Monday, the 20th of March. And we're also going to be starting the community conversations on the landscape update, and that will be on the 13th of next month, also at 7 o'clock. All those meetings are either in person here or remote.
We're all on the email list, starting to get those. That's cool. Is that your anything else? Do you get any other public comment or hear from anybody? It looks like the person from Joel's is here, Mr. Tuano, and I can't tell the top person there.
Amy Tosley?
Is that our consultant? Oh, okay.
I'll have her introduce herself.
Okay. For those on the Zoom meeting, if you'd like to address the Planning Commission on, whatever topic, please state your name and your address and tell us your thoughts. Thanks for being here. Ms. Towsley?
Absolutely. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Amy Towsley. I'm a local manager with Puget Sound Energy and really engaging with the cities and counties on the periodic update to the comprehensive plans. So I thought I would just listen in on your meeting tonight as you kind of put your public participation process and kind of talk about where you're going to go from here to there. So thank you.
Very good, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to be here. And Mr. Tuano, would you like to tell us anything, any of your thoughts?
Hello, this is Jerome from the Jones. Don't really have a comment to make. Just want to monitor what happens. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for covering us. Great. Let's go on to the 8th item of business, the 2025 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update Process and our draft Community Outreach Plan. Okay.
So tonight's discussion, I wanted to bring the planning commission up to speed on where we were in developing our public participation plan. We're not quite as far along in planning as I could this point, so this is essentially a draft, which is probably the best for you because now you can say, we need to add all these things. The other important thing to understand is now, with Erica on board, she's now in charge of this project completely. Looking forward to so just as a quick recap for all of this, we have a state mandate to update our comprehensive plan and our development regulations on a 10-year cycle. And the last time we did that was in 2016. The next update is due June 30th of 2025. For the direction we've received from the mayor and the council so far in discussing this program in the fall and that fall, is that we're not looking for a wholesale update revisioning exercise for the comp plan. Feeling is that the vision is what we want. It's just a matter of making sure that we update the comprehensive plan to take into account not only the state requirements that have changed in the past few years, but also the fact that the city has grown, both through annexation and through this. Part of this process that we're going to be going through is going to involve reaching out beyond the planning commission and the city council to members of the community. What we're really looking for as part of the discussion tonight is ways of reaching the residents and the property owners and the people who work in the city to get their input on the update process. That's one of the things that we really kind of struggled with. If we have a topic that excites people, AKA it's a topic that people don't like, we can get people very interested. You know, and the more upsetting, the more interested they get.
Sometimes accidentally.
Exactly. We don't necessarily want to pursue that strategy this time. We're looking for, you know, positive. You know, what do you see, and how do you think we should accommodate these things? And so the public participation plan really sort of outlines, first of all, the audiences we're trying to reach and the means by which we're trying to reach those particular audiences. And also it starts to lay out the schedule for which we do that. So that will be something that will be developing further after we go through those first two items as part of this. I want to draw your attention to a couple of big items that are part of the update. Under the new state legislation that passed last year, our housing element is going to be substantially changed and updated. In the past, all we've had to do is get a population projection through OFM. County and the cities agree to how that's allocated across the county. And then we just lay out our zoning and say we can accommodate it. It's not that simple this time. We're going to get a population projection coming from the state. The county and the cities will talk about how to allocate that across the jurisdictions. But now we have to account for housing for each economic strata. So everything from under 30% inline, under 50%, under 80%, and so forth. We have to, first of all, identify how many housing units meet that criteria, affordable to those particular groups, and how many housing units were either over or under those particular groups. Our preliminary numbers that we looked at so far indicate that we're really hurting in terms of not providing housing for under the under 80%. Which means, as part of the plan, we have to identify how we're going to address that. Not necessarily identifying specific funding, say, for example, supportive housing and things like that, but we have to have, I want to say, realistic policies for how we're going to close that gap. What that may mean is, in some cases, we may be looking at the broader picture. Do we have adequate densities in the city to allow for the development of housing to support those populations? Meaning, can we keep the single-family zoning levels that we've had and still achieve those goals? Preliminary, probably not, but we'll have to really sort of break into a number of ways to try to figure out how to do that. It's one thing to increase density across the city. It's another thing to make sure that people who probably may not have access to a car or have access to transportation. We'll have to take into account transit and the possibility of extension of transit service as part of this process. We're also probably going to have to look at some level of expanding the incentives we offer for building affordable housing. For those commissioners who weren't here, a few years back, the council prepared a resolution in 2018, which outlined a whole series of actions the city was to undertake to address both homelessness and affordable housing in the city. On the homelessness side, we've really, I don't want to say we've achieved those goals, we certainly haven't, but we've gotten into the working with the other jurisdictions in the county under the Regional Housing Council. And that's really our way of, committing our resources to regional projects where we have a much better chance of doing something than finding enough money on the local level and management of the local level to do that. So I think we'll be able to draw on that as part of the comp plan. The other part to that we worked on was a set of changes to our Title 18 to reduce parking requirements, to increase the places where we allow duplexes throughout the city. We've also added a section on incentives, specific incentives for developers to build affordable housing, either density or height related things. We haven't had anybody take us up on this, so I think we're going to have to look. We've also tweaked our fee structure. So if an affordable housing project of meeting a certain income goals come in and is permanently affordable, not like a multi-family tax exemption, only good for 8 or 12 years. There are incentives built into that for not only our review fees, which are a small portion of the fees and all that other stuff that we collect, but the larger components like the impact fees for parks and roads and schools and so forth, as well as our connection charges, which also are really pretty part of the revenue stream for connecting to sewer, connecting to water. So I don't think we've had any takers on that yet, but again, when we started this process, we just sort of figured we had to do lots of little things, hoping we end up achieving the bigger goal. With that in mind, and when you're thinking of those, this public participation plan, who needs to be involved, what organizations we should be reaching out to, and all those kinds of things, keep that in mind that that's going to be the primary driver of this update. It's housing, housing, housing. Other things will be not as present, not as high. Commissioner, right?
Oh, yes.
Two things cross my mind. One is, how do we account for the people that live in Tumwater and work in other communities? The people who live in other communities and work in Tumwater, if in fact Tumwater is below where it should be in the amount of, low-cost housing. And if we look at the population of Tumwater, we're gonna get a dysfunctional figure because people who should be living in low-cost housing aren't here because of low-cost housing isn't here.
That was one of the points we made to Commerce, about this whole process. Not a close the borders and everybody, within, it's separate. We're obviously, I commute from Olympia, work in Tumwater. I'm sure some of you may be living in Tumwater and going elsewhere. So it's a difficult, thing to try to address, but the structure we've been given by the state is we focus on current population of Tumwater and how we are going to account for those individual income groups across the board going forward. So, I haven't seen the numbers yet that are coming out from TRPC from the final calculation. There's a couple things that are still occurring in the background that we're still sorting out. Number one, we're still sorting out the whole issue of allocating population from, the county gets one number from the state, and we're still talking about how that number will be allocated to all the jurisdictions and the county. We have a number to plan for. We're also still discussing what that will look like for affordable housing. There are a couple of free options that are presented by Commerce to deal with that. There's the straight, every jurisdiction has to the same percentages for each group across the board. So Dakota has to deal with the under 30% and has to provide permanently affordable housing for those under the 30% or demonstrate they're dealing with it within the city somehow. Not really, in my mind, realistic thought, because from the service provider standpoint, that means you're scattering your resources and your personnel across multiple jurisdictions, and maybe not the most efficient way to do it. But there's the overall equity issue of making sure you do so, each jurisdiction takes their share. Background. There's a couple other things that we're thinking about, how to juggle that to allow for those kinds of issues. Not necessarily taking away the equity issue, but mitigating for, I want to consider reality of how we may handle certain income groups for.
Seems like it's gonna be interesting.
That's what I'm thinking, and that's why I don't have the easy answers yet.
Commissioner Von Holtz?
You might be able to take, I know that DSHS, they have, they take data. I know they do it by county, and I want to say they do it by city. So you would be able to see how many people in Tumwater are eligible for services through DSHS. So that would show you the threshold. They're under the poverty line or just right at it. So that could help. And that's online. I'll look for it when I get home.
Related to that, Brad, I'm wondering if we could invite someone from TRPC to a future meeting here to give us a synopsis of their analysis, particularly out of the Census Bureau's recent 2020 census, and what we know from, the slicing and dicing of the census data, like what Commissioner Von Holtz is describing, and some trend lines from the past. I don't know if that's possible to bring somebody in, but it would be good to have that kind of basis in the numbers.
I think there's a couple of people we work with at TRPC, I think would be more than happy to talk with us. I think the important thing to understand is TRPC is the messenger.
Yeah.
They're not making the ultimate decisions on how things sort of break out.
Sure.
What the jurisdictions.
Sure, yeah.
I like the way
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that kind of between city staff, you guys, and TRPC, there's a good synopsis to be had based in that, what the data are showing.
Yeah, well, I think that would be very appropriate. So I think we'll do that after the larger issue of population allocation has been resolved on the county level. Then I think we'd be ready to bring in TRPC to talk about not only that, but also the trends, as you mentioned, across the line for not only population growth and housing, but also economics. And they can speak to all of that. In the meantime, if you want to get a sort of a snapshot of what the city breakdown is in terms of all those factors, you can go onto the TRPC website, and there's a community summary, that's published every year for all the jurisdictions. It's a 2-page document that is like the demographics 101 for everybody. So if you're curious on what Tumwater looks like, if you're curious what any of the other jurisdictions look like, they also have a lot of tabular data broken out, and the important thing for us on the planning side is the change over time for that, both for the city itself and our associated UGAs. So you can see that breakdown for all the jurisdictions and get a sense of.
No, other than Commerce also oversees the Housing Essential Needs Program, so they have data on who's eligible for housing.
Any questions or anything on that particular topic, or any other suggestions on? So, we have, things, just to sort of, again, we're going to be working with our communications team, but this really will be driven by planning commission and our staff in terms of how we approach this issue. We're going to be asking for assistance with the community, with the communications team, but we're not necessarily going to ask them to lead the process throughout the council will ultimately have to approve our work program, so I'm hoping that we'll develop it over the course of the next coming month and have that approved in April. In the plan, we'll also lay out all of the dates of outreach that we're going to have, different levels. There are 10 different elements that are sort of like the broad categories of what we're going to cover in the plan. In our current land use element, there's a section on public participation and intergovernmental coordination, so we're going to be using that process. We may update it as we need to, but that's going to be sort of the broad framework of how. So if you want to go online and look at that, that's a good resource. We're also going to look for opportunities to not only talk with the planning commission, but the other advisory boards as needed on particular topics. Since we're not doing the full-fledged Parks and Rec update plan, I don't think we won't have as much coordination as we anticipated with that board, but I think we'd probably be involving some of the others. Ultimately, all of this process, with the exception of Megan and Terry, I don't think anybody else was here for the last decade. So it will be handled similarly to our regular ordinance process, except much bigger. We sort of structured it for our discussions, first of all, on the general topics. I mentioned of the housing, how are we going to accommodate housing, all those kinds of things. Then we get into discussion of the specific elements that make up contents of those. We'll be taking the commission through each of those. We'll be having you review each of those elements and providing comment. As I mentioned, I think at the end of last year, we are going to be striving for a much shorter document. So that there some, like Terry, wanted to double the size of what we have currently, as did Megan, but we're going to overrule those suggestions and try to do something shorter.
I really do have a question about that.
Oh, go ahead.
Our city manager is sadly moving on, and I thought that priority sort of came from our city manager, and the question is along the lines of like, how are we going to make sure we carry that torch?
Yes. Yeah, we're figuring that out. He has made the mistake so far of leaving off the year under the date of the month he's leaving, so he said he's leaving in May. We filled that in for him. Then he said, no, that's not going to happen. So John will be here until the new city manager is on board. Won't be an interim. I wasn't part of this decision. John and the mayor thought it would be appropriate to make sure the transition is smooth as possible from person to the next person. couple things that sort of guide our work and also guide the commission's work is the strategic priorities that the council's established will remain the same. Council's established them, mayor supports them, and ultimately the mayor is in charge of our staff and the city administrator. So I don't think the broader picture is going to change. I think what may change is maybe specific programs or specific things that fall under that broader vision may be tweaked or changed depending upon that person's experience, what other things they think are important to help achieve those goals, or things that we haven't seen or thought about. That may change. I don't think we're going to see a dramatic change in sort of this is where the city's going to go in the future. Mayor and the council really set those. I don't see that really changing.
I just meant the torch of the shortening. I was so excited to hear about the shortening of the plan
That,
for
I
accessibility.
think it will be an easy argument to say we're going to shorten it just to save paper.
It's just a lot of work to do that.
It's a lot of work, well, it's a lot of work to update a lot of pages, and it's hopefully not as much work to pop out.
My grad school professor said good writing is rewriting, and shorten. It was a tough lesson learned, but it takes more time to write a short thing than a long thing.
I agree, and the hope is ultimately that more people will read the shorter documents.
Yeah,
that's right.
Mhm.
The underlying.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of impetus for having it be short, but I think we also need it to be crisp and accessible
Yeah.
and meaningful to
Yeah.
people. So if, you know, if we have to go, 2 pages over or whatever, the page count is less important than, is that somehow meaningful to everybody?
Sure.
Mhm.
And we're not operating, and it has to be X number of pages. But again, the example that we have looked at that Commerce really likes and we really like is from the city of SeaTac. So if you want to see again, an example of kind of what we're trying to strive for, the SeaTac example is a good one. They have two components to each of their elements. One deals with just policies and objectives. So it's the policymakers can pull that out and have easy access to, I think, the heart of what the comp plan is. And then the technical documents, the supporting documents are also separate elements. They're also kept short, and any larger studies are done as appendices, so.
And then, I'm sure last go-round, the city availed itself of, not just having to be paper, but electronic means that you can, take advantage of all that interconnectedness of topics and things and weave it together, for the user who will most likely see the content in that way, not as just a kind of a, lengthy narrative kind of a thing.
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna do that. So I definitely see the advantages of that. But if we start too early to sort of establish the links, then finish the links. So what we may do is, as we're going through the review of the document, unlinked version, but the final version will build in those particular links once we have the full document. Because I think it would be, just from the staffing standpoint, we can do that. I'm not sure if we'll be able to do the full link. So back to the update process and what the role of the planning commission is in all of it. You're the guiding light. Your job is to really see the big picture. We'll be talking about housing, we'll be talking about environmental issues, we'll be talking about some of these other things, but the thing to keep in the back of your mind is how do these relate to everything else? And to point out, if we do this, do we have an effect on something else? Positive or negative? Or we could look for multiple opportunities in one place. Always a nice thing. This, we also get easy things. So after the commission goes through each of the elements and has the discussions on that, we'll go through the formal ordinance adoption process. And we'll try to we're gonna have one hearing for the entire document, but that hearing may be over multiple days. So multiple meetings. We might call it one hearing, but it might be 2 or 3 meetings, depending upon how many issues we have, and more importantly, the community input as part of the process. So another thing this public engagement plan is important for is sort of where do we want to draw in actively community input. We definitely want them involved early in the process. We want them discussing the larger issues. We want them, if they're interested, being involved in the discussions of the individual elements, but we also definitely want them involved towards the end. Earlier the better, I think, just to make sure we get the issues out and discussed. Easier to try to answer questions and to make tweaks to before we get to closer to the end than it is. Leave it entirely to the council. Take all public comment, and see what happens. But the planning commission ultimately will be holding a public hearing and then issuing a recommendation to the council on the plan. Hopefully will be in support. Have the option, obviously, not agreeing with staff and having suggestions. But we would like to work towards that. We will also be making sure that we discuss this update process with the council as we're moving along. So our primary group that we'll be talking with will be the General Government Committee. We'll be giving updates on the process, identifying any specific issues that we're hearing, getting their input as we need to on some of the bigger issues, and relaying that back to you as the planning commission.
Brad, one of the things for, kind of on the topic of, the brevity of the ultimate document or its organization or whatever, I think, depending on how things go, it might be helpful to think of the elements or think of the, kind of the, over time. I mean, the city's been at this comprehensive planning for 30, 40 years or something, right? And so we're not brand new at it. We've got a lot to build upon, and some things have worked well. So, we can show what's working well and what we should continue. What are the trends? Where are we off from the trend? What needs to change? So making sure we're kind of highlighting those kinds of things for people so that they know that the planning work is working, but also pointing out, the future that we still need to work toward. Or maybe you can think of better ways to, talk about that, but, highlighting the changes that will be coming or that the comprehensive plan will mean for people because we still have progress that we want to make. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
It certainly does. And I think that it's also important to remember that Thurston County and Water Olympian basically leaders in the whole planning movement in the 90s. Work that had already been done here in sort of the statewide approach.
Right.
I think the overall structure is probably still okay. We still need to make some tweaks around.
Right.
Actually, these are some goals that I've adopted from the previous public engagement plan, but I'm more than happy to have updates as you see needed to this list. All of those things are important, but I'm not sure if I'm getting everything. Providing information to help the community understand issues, seeking early and continuous involvement from people who care about the plan and the community, offer opportunities to the community to provide feedback to staff, appointed officials, make the process accessible and engaging for everyone, make community-driven planning a priority for this plan, highlight the projects implemented since the last periodic update, use a flexible phased approach, integrate and consolidate goals from all elements and resource plans, develop a comprehensive plan that is easy to read and understandable, and rely on multiple communication media to share information. What's not included in that list very quickly, obviously, is the larger equity issue that will be part of all the discussions we'll be having as part of the comp plan, and also climate related will be across all plans. If there's anything else that I'm not including in those goals, the broad goals, I'd like to send me a line or anything just to make that change. Also in the document that you got, in Appendix A is a list of all the stakeholders. It's about 4 or 5 pages. Organizations and perhaps individuals that we've identified in the process. This is sort of derived from multiple projects that we've done over the years. I don't think it's a complete list. I think it's very helpful if, when you have the time, you can just look through it, and if you know of organizations or you know of people or things like that, follow the process, let me know. Need more sets of eyes on this list. Or if there are other people in the community that we'd like to share this with. The broad scope of what's being done here, who do you think is, would be important people to include at the table for discussions of particular issues? That would be also. I think my intent is to try to probably bring this back at the second meeting in March. Any comments that you may have, with the intent of then turning that document into that week. That should work for our schedule. We started to talk through the various media, or at least parts of this that was using. We will maintain sort of a listserv of all interested parties. We established an email that I will share for any updates or any context. We will also be updating our website to reflect all that. So I expect that this will be sort of integrated. We're also expecting to hopefully roll out a new website citywide here shortly. That's why we're kind of holding off on the website. At least I'm using that as an excuse not to have to work. Well, so Erica showed up and now I have to do this. But the intent really is to sort of use multiple social media to let people know what's happening. So the city's Facebook webpage, other utility inserts, whatever, a whole range of things that we can do for that. We're also looking at identifying what would be a good thing to do as online surveys as part of this process. I don't think we'll have the budget to do a full-blown, basically citywide ballot survey, but I think we do have the opportunity to do other touch points, ways to get information to a survey mechanism, recognizing that it's not necessarily a statistically valid. We talked about webpage, we talked about social media. We will be doing press releases and media advertisements as part of the social media side of things. We're also looking for opportunities for open houses. Kind of probably in the middle of the, as you told you earlier, this is the urban forestry regulation update time, and we're having 2 or 3 stakeholder meetings a month, probably at least until April. So I don't anticipate we'll be looking to do anything like that for the comp plan until probably June. Everybody a little bit of a breather. A little bit about what the planning commission will do. City council and their general government and the public works committees will be reviewing elements of the plan as well. General government will be the primary. Public works will handle the transportation element and probably the facilities element. And there will be the formal city council public hearing work sessions. We've broken out the general timeline for community outreach into 3 phases. The first is the general community outreach, which will be this summer, probably extend into the fall, because I don't think we've had adequate time yet to accomplish all these things. This is where the staff will start to review what our current plan says, their gap analysis and studies of what we think needs to change, what reason, either state mandate or other things, and present that to the planning commission We'll also be reaching out to community and stakeholders on sort of why do we have a comp plan? And more importantly, how does the comp plan help? Larger message, I think, that we need, not just a state requirement, or we use it to guide our mission within the city. It's a broader document that needs to be. Plan development will take probably through the end of summer of this year through the spring of next year. That will be sort of taking everything that we gathered through the community outreach process and to start to work through the individual drafts of the documents. I think similar to the process that we've been following for the forestry management plan updates, regulation side, we're going to focus sort of on the big issues first rather than dive into the exact language of the plan. So that's where I think we'll have the discussion of the housing, how best to approach this issue, to work through those bigger topics, and then distill that into elements. This is also where we'll sort of have any cross consultations with the other commissions and boards as needed. We're also looking at either technical experts that we might need, say from the housing, either say housing providers or specific residential groups or things like that, to talk about, so to bring the expert, the elements that we don't have. And then finally, phase 3 will be the legislative process, which we anticipate will probably take, allow a year for that to be completed. Because that, we want to make sure that as we're going through the individual elements, the commission has more than enough time to learn what we're doing, have time to review and provide comments. Before we comment section process, a little bit more detail. Bring up who we're going to be talking with. So, any questions on the general process we've outlined?
I was just going to go back just momentarily to kind of the specific outreach kind of stuff. And I'm, kind of with the principle of meeting people where they are. I wonder if you could maybe not right now, maybe you haven't got this, but, kind of a recap of the available platforms to reach people, because not everybody really looks at email. Not everybody looks at Facebook. Younger people maybe have different platforms that are more, that is, better preference for them. That kind of thing.
We did have a brief discussion about a budget for developing short TikTok videos. Shut down for that because it wasn't appropriate content.
Okay.
But anyway, we're still, I think I understand what you. I think that's why I kind of use the broader term social media.
Yeah.
And then as we need to identify other platforms that we can reach other audiences. One thing that we want to do also is, the social media approach will be definitely probably primary means we're trying to outreach. We also want to meet with them in person. So we're the previous update, there was a series of coffees offered around the community where the staff would be available. Questions that could, all the Starbucks in town, all the independent coffee shops, whatever. It really captivated and tried to answer questions. But that kind of approach and advertising that kind of thing, I would like to do as well. In addition to, say, using the farmers market as a good opportunity to sort of have an outreach there, or any of those other things in school. We got other one.
Yeah. particularly, you know, some of the higher education, kind of, maybe there's newsletters, or maybe they have an interest to, help us promote, you know, awareness or things. I'm thinking of SPCC and, SPSCC, the Evergreen State College, because, you know, people who live here, they go to those schools, even St. Martin's, I guess, there's people who live here at St. Martin's, and, or, you know, some of the major employers, may have newsletters as well. Or, go ahead, Commissioner Edwards.
Yeah, and I know when I think about like advertising and stuff like that, I think one of the first things that come to my mind is like having a really easy way to explain to people why they should care. Like, how is this going to impact you? Because it's one thing to see like a flyer of, oh, this county staff, or this, town staff person is going to be available to talk to you or something like that. The city, and, but they'll be like, oh, okay, that's great. But if they knew more about how it was going to impact them, like what things that they could actually give feedback on, like how it was going to affect their daily lives, just someone like living and working in Tumwater, I think that that would make people maybe pay attention a little bit more instead of just being like, oh, it's just another thing that I can just throw in the recycle bin.
Add on to that, if there's a way, as you digitally collect information, to like separately have people give their email address to enter to win something, that's a good incentive, but like you have to help them be able to trust you that you're not gonna identify their answers with their contact information.
Disaggregating this group, and if we're lucky, we'll have 100 people. I don't know if we're gonna be that lucky. But I don't want people to feel that if I express a viewpoint, that I should be, this is something we heard.
When you say it like that, if we're lucky, we're gonna have 100 people, I'm like, when you think about equity, I'm like, who are those 100 people? It's not equitable.
Right.
Right.
And then, again, that comes back to identifying the stakeholders and getting in on those organizations that we don't necessarily see, you may see. Recognizing, of course, that there's a level of trust and relationship building. Yes, this is a two-year process. I don't know if that's sufficient.
Right. Some of those organizations may be able to help us carry that water a little bit, you know, if we can explain to them, and then, you know, have them help us with that outreach a little bit. Commissioner?
And I think that that's why I was really happy to see like surveys listed in here too, because a lot of times people just can't come to events, like they have kids or they're working or they don't have money for gas or, you know, whatever. And it's, you know, so giving people time and a way to kind of respond that works for them, as many different opportunities like that. So I found that surveys have been great for that.
Even the nights out at movie nights in the parks, or or any of those kinds of. Some of that outreach.
You could have a table as
Yeah.
parents drop off their kids and give them a $5 Starbucks card if they fill out a survey or something.
Yeah, in previous efforts, we've used Brewfest, be there, to present things and we float. But yes, we're open to any and all.
The 4th of July.
Yeah.
You're down there. And
Brewfest was an interesting. That worked okay.
Can I ask a question about housing? I don't believe we've been there. We're talking about housing and housing stock, and you're talking about now having to identify housing stock availability on a percentage of average income, I think, but that was the term you used. I don't know.
What would be affordable to a particular income group, or what they could afford?
So, do you have I suspect you have a good idea of cost of building? What's the cheapest housing for a developer to build? Assume it's a 3-story walk-up. I mean, that's my guess, a 3-story walk-up apartment. But then how does that compare to the 6-story, I assume, elevator service buildings are gonna go in on Little Rock? You know, versus a 4-plex or a 6-plex or a duplex, or, you know, I'd love to see the breakdown on like a per square footage basis, not including land, on the different types of housing. And I don't know how you guys would identify it. I mean, I'm sure that you've got a breakdown, but, you know, a single family house for me is a single family house, whether it's 500,000 or $1 million. But I'd be really curious to see the cost of a new build.
Mm-hmm.
And we could definitely also put that information. I think the other thing to keep in mind is affordability is not going to necessarily, new construction is going to allow for more movement in the housing market, to allow
Yeah.
people to move, and those properties towards the bottom become more available.
That's 30 years affordability. I mean, that's affordable housing in 30 years. That's what new construction is. That's in my humble opinion, but.
And that's, for rare instance, do you have brand new construction? But yeah, I definitely can come up with some costs, and I think we can get into more detail once we have
Brad, the other thing that might be, I know that would be helpful to me once we really get going, is some kind of a schematic of the timeline, the elements, the progress, we are here now, we're discussing this today, of all the bazillion different that would be helpful, because I know there's just a lot of moving parts. And, you know, with a big star at the end, you know, in 25, summer of 25, but you know, so that we all can always just orient, you know, we're covering this today, we've made this progress, you know, how much to go, you know, next steps. I don't know if that's too difficult, but, you know, we keep coming back to that as sort of our grounding place.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate, and I think we've used that in other large projects. Easy for people to understand where in the process we are, what we have. We're gonna have to rely more on helping other people with these graphics, so forth, to do that, because those of us who are text-bound, it takes a while for us to learn. But you bring up also a very good point about how we ultimately would like to see the comp plan look. The text will be there, because we do have to use the words, but how we lay them out, how we present them, we want to be a little bit more than paragraph after paragraph. I'll explain.
Yeah.
We really want to have more of a graphic.
That was part of what I was trying to ask about before, is like, how are we going to get there, to not just chop the text, but to have it be, visually appealing and flow, and like have the bolded text and the boxes and the, you know, images and all the things. Like, you don't have to have an answer today, and I will always be wondering how we're gonna get there. I'm so curious about that part.
Yeah, I share your curiosity. But I do know, and just from my experience reading, say, some of the newer, those of us who are infrastructure geeks, infrastructure books, the graphic approaches they use are actually pretty cool. It's a mixture of pictures and text, it's a mixture of there's graphic flow, it's everything, so there's a lot more going on. So I think we've got a lot of great examples. We don't have to invent it, unless of course it's copyrighted, and we'll figure out how to deal with that. But I think we can make our own scale. Look good. Easier to replicate.
It kind of makes me think too about if people are giving us, you know, their time and willing to come and participate and respond and do surveys and stuff like that. I've always found that it's really good to like follow up with people at the end and say, okay, thank you for giving us the feedback. This is how we incorporated it, or this is like what we heard, and make sure that we have some type of communication or documentation that goes back out to those folks so that they just don't feel like that their voices went into some black void and, okay, yeah, I'm gonna say this, but they're never gonna do it, and no one's really gonna listen to just follow back up and be like, yeah, we did, and this is what we heard, and this is how we incorporated it.
I think that's very valuable. We've been, on a smaller level, in some recent projects, we've had some people who agree with what we're doing. If we're able to basically explain how we listen and how they're, what the next steps will be in the process, and how they can be involved further, and where their words went after they said them. I think that was very valuable. They thought we did a good job, even though they didn't agree with us.
We have a list of all the HOAs in the city.
We have an incomplete list, but we can cross some of that.
Going from using our HOA as as an example, I would think the busybodies on our board would love to give their opinion on all sorts of topics. Maybe a letter to the HOAs would be, you might get people who are totally bored and just love writing letters, but taking surveys or complaining.
This wouldn't be a way to distract, say, those HOA members from within the. No, that's actually a good suggestion, one thing.
I have an add-on for that, for HOAs and neighborhood associations. Maybe in the letter, it's like, here's a few sentences you can share on your Facebook, and here's a post you can share on your whatever social media they're using. Not all of them are using that, but like Carline North is 400 homes and 100 of them are Tumwater, and there's a Facebook page, and people do look at it, even though there's not a lot going on, you know.
They may not claim to, but they do.
Mr. Tobias?
I just thought of this actually, speaking of social medias, would Nextdoor count as a type of social media that we?
A lot going on there too.
That's exactly what I was thinking, as soon as you mentioned, I'm like, because you may not have, a whole neighborhood Facebook group, but you could definitely see like a whole neighborhood on Nextdoor, I imagine.
Do you have something in those surveys that's like, but do you live or work in Tumwater? Because Nextdoor could draw a pretty wide funnel.
That's a good point.
That's actually, that's always a question we have to ask, because we have we're in a larger community that's a very active community. So we get a lot of interest from outside the community.
Yeah.
Whether they work or.
Right.
But we want to reflect.
You could lure them in with a fake picture, or a picture of a fake cougar, and when they click on it, they think it's a cougar in their backyard, and then they see it. That always seems to make the rounds, Tumwater Hill.
Add Brian to the list of people we can watch, have him design a list.
There's a way to structure those so that, because it, depending on how many of these platforms there are, you're not going to be able to staff them all for comments or whatever, but you can at least, put the notice out there, and here's a link to get to the survey or the, whatever the thing is, and have them, that gets collected.
They have to come to us.
Right.
They have to all go to us.
The initial outreach is wherever they are, but, having been on some of these sites, it kind of quickly devolves sometimes. And so, that may not be the primary source of information.
I think also back to the point of wanting to make sure that people offer their opinions.
Right.
How we do that and how we present the information might be.
Right.
We might put the information out on not necessarily conversations in every location at once.
Right. Yeah. Prototype it. Yep.
You can get, on social media, you can get geo-targeted ads, and they're so inexpensive. It's not even funny, like a couple $100 and, yeah.
Also, I just want to mention, as part of this process, we started by talking about updating the comp plan. We're also updating the development. The good news is, for the most part, we're semi-caught up on where we should be. So, for example, the emergency housing ordinance last year, we've already, last year was one of those updates we would have had to have done if we had already taken care of. So there will be some opportunity to, especially if we make substantial changes to the comp plan, that we need to reflect those in development regulations. So, and as a reminder, we had put off a couple of items from the previous amendment cycle and said we would do it as part of the update. Central public facilities and related to, and also mixed use development. So those things will be incorporated into the. That was all I
That
had.
was what you had. Okay, so that was item number 8. Are you ready to go on to the roles?
Are there any other questions or comments from? So if you could have any comments you may have on the materials that were in the packet today, back to me, say by the first week of March 13th, respond and build it into the packet for the second meeting in March. So, new item, we had discussions, both with some planning commissioners and also council members about, the larger update process that we're going through for the urban forestry management and the various regulations. And one of the questions that had come up was the roles of the various boards and commissions in the process. The concern expressed, and this was expressed to me both by commissioners and by council members over the last few weeks, is that on the tree board side, we have some real experts in trees themselves. They know that this particular species will work well in this particular situation, these won't. And then there was a concern expressed by some that with the sort of the expertise being discussed, that didn't feel comfortable expressing or asking questions as part of the process. And I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit through that, if we can, and sort of explain the various roles and why I see them for the boards and why we involved the tree board in the first place and so forth. Number one, the tree board is structured and is specifically called out in our code as the board to advocate for trees. Underline. That's their role. Like the Historic Preservation Commission, they have one big mission. They focus on that mission. Experts are called out. The board is supposed to have at least 2 professionals that work in the field as part of the board. I think the current board structure has 4 that have that kind of experience, either a landscape architect, a forester, or something else. So that's sort of built into their structure. This is what they are. And then the planning commission's role is in the broad vision of the city. You're responsible for everything that happens on development policy and development code. So any change that, or what the city looks like and how it functions, from the transportation side of things, from land use side of things, and all of that, is really sort of under the planning commission. More importantly, your job, again, as I mentioned earlier, is to be the one that says, that's great, and that works well here. How does that affect these other things, other big goals that we have? We've had discussions when we've talked about, if we do this for trees, how does this affect affordable housing? If we do this for affordable housing, how does this affect this? And so forth. So the planning commissioners, by your role, is a much broader generalist approach. The other important thing is the tree board members are really, well, they're experts in the functions of individual trees and individual situations. Ultimately, it's the planning commission that's going to offer recommendations to the city on any of the ordinances or any regulatory changes. So that, in my mind, that's a couple of things. One, planning commissioners have to feel they understand and agree, and a majority needs to agree, with what is being proposed. So say, for example, we've had a discussion so far with tree preservation. Let's use the credit system, figuring out the worth of a tree, and whether it's going to be saved, and if it's taken down, it's going to be worth X amount of credits, and you have to replace X amount. All of those concepts and all of that, you as planning commissioners have to understand what they mean and feel comfortable with that, because ultimately you are going to be explaining and recommending to the council why you think this is a good idea. If you don't feel comfortable with that, or you don't feel comfortable in understanding particular things or need to ask the questions, there are a couple of options. You can ask those questions directly, or you can ask us as staff to sort of help present those ideas. We need a little help in framing this. We need a little help in talking about how we can talk about it. So I think our role as staff here is to make sure that you feel comfortable asking the questions that you need to be asking in order for you ultimately to feel comfortable with what's going to come out in terms of recommendation. So if there are specific things like that that you need help from staff on, or if you need help in framing that, or structuring discussions or whatever, we can definitely explore all those kinds of things. But ultimately, we want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. Any thoughts from the commissioners? Speaking from on a third or fourth level from commissioners or council members that I've heard.
I'll just ask, has anybody, any of the commissioners felt like you didn't get a chance to ask questions or put your ideas out there, or?
No, last meeting, and it was brought up, I was remote, so I didn't really feel like raising my hand, and the issue was brought up about how some of the decisions being made with the tree plan might affect people who are low income. I gave Brad the example of myself. When I first bought a home, I had no business buying a house, and one thing like the city telling me I needed to have an arborist take down a tree would have really affected myself and my 3 kids that were at home at the time. So that was brought up, but I felt very strongly like we need to take into consideration people who are retired and maybe their income is limited, people who bought a house because everybody should buy a house except for, and it's all fun and games until something goes wrong. Like those things that happen that affect real people, like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to, the example that Alyssa brought up at this meeting about ways the community decided to try to address equity issues in the community and the heat island effect in communities that were struggling was to have a program where they went out and they planted everything in those communities, but they left the ongoing maintenance and operation to those individual property owners, which became a real burden. So it's like anything within the social services, you can build a facility, but you still have to operate it. Right. I definitely see that as you know, we have some really good goals, but I want to make sure that they're achievable or that we identify for the council. If you really want to do this, this is a good idea. This is the resources that we probably need to consider providing. These communities may not be able to do that.
Well, like building roadways where, yes, it's all good, but then the money to maintain the roadways is never there, right? So, yeah.
Well, one of the things I want to make sure of is whether we're here in person or folks on, you know, you participate by Zoom sometime. You know, if you want a question or raise a point or whatever, I don't want people to feel like you can't do that. You know, I want you to do that. So if there's, you know, if you're back online or something sometime and you feel like we've gone over, you shout out, raise your hand, interrupt, so that we can make sure that your point gets covered. Mr. Tobias.
So speaking sort of to the equity side of things, but on the process of, when we're doing a joint meeting, we have so many people, together at once in a meeting. It could be, trying to think of the most diplomatic way to say this of, if you have the same couple of people that you hear from, 3, 4, 5 times in the same meeting, then it can seem like the equilibrium of who's sharing and when and how much can sort of get out of whack. And then, you're less likely to want to speak up because you already know the meeting's going on for so long, and, you don't want to, crowd it even more. So I wonder if there's a way to, diplomatically, and this is more on the chair and facilitator side of things, to be able to say, can we hear from someone who hasn't shared yet, or see if the folks who haven't, because if you, I think, offer that as an option, people, I think, you throw the rope, people are more likely to take it. And not to ever, I wouldn't dream of ever wanting to shut someone down to just say, oh, no, you've already talked too much, so you can stop now. But, to be able to say, encourage hearing from the voices that we haven't yet. I think, equity starts here.
Yeah.
How we facilitate our meetings. So that's just my,
Yeah, excellent point. I go to my little deck of members where I rifle through and call on you.
Calling them upstairs and say something.
But I mean, that is
Sure, that'll work.
an excellent point, that I'll try to make if we are in that situation, we haven't heard from somebody. Meanwhile, if you're itching and squirming, make it obvious as best you can, because we do want to hear you.
I think you run a very open meeting. I don't think anybody is ever clamoring to speak and doesn't, but,
Okay.
who knows, it's possible.
Yes, it's possible, so
Absolutely.
I want to make sure people know and come over here and clunk me.
I'll share a couple of things. When we're doing the community conversations, it was difficult to manage the online and we basically decided, okay, we're gonna go through, everybody wants to talk in person first. Look for all, then we'll look to the online. With the thought of being that, hopefully people feel more comfortable to talk in person. And the more conversation that occurs here, the more encouragement those people who are gonna have online to talk. Now, a second technique, and I don't think it's gonna necessarily work as well here, is the uncomfortable silence technique, which is used by a consultant recently on our project we have that worked very effectively, and I never thought of. They basically let the congregation die until somebody said, I can't handle it anymore, and they said something. And that actually provoked more people to talk over time. And we got to more places than I would imagine, and pointing out, Terry, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think there's some science about 7 or 8 seconds of silence.
Mm-hmm.
The media trick.
Yeah.
And the person leading the meeting was very patient. I was like,
It's true.
sounds like the evil cousin of laughter yoga.
It was a carbular trick.
It was so effective that we got everyone, 18 people to speak.
It's pretty darn good.
And it was first thing in the morning.
Yes, it was.
So in addition to any other thoughts you have about this, if you're not comfortable, say, bringing it up before the commission tonight or anything, or anything happens in the future that you would like, we need, let me know. Ultimately, my responsibility to make sure that everybody feels comfortable expressing their opinions.
And did the members of the tree board, feel like they're heard as well? I want to make sure, because
We'll have discussions with them.
they've got some expertise we're tapping into for sure.
Mhm.
Was that that item?
That was it. If the commissioners have anything else?
Commissioner Kirkpatrick?
Going back to the housing, that we discussed at the beginning. That's my statement. all this before the legislature. We just went through, modifying our zoning to allow duplexes, other, housing that could be low income, all areas, put a percentage limit on them. My reading of the discussions of the bill, not the bill itself, indicate that, what's coming possibly is as many as you wanted in any zoning. And, I'm wondering if, you've had any discussions, because that's obviously something that we're gonna have to change, that we just finished changing.
Yeah, and we're kind of holding our breath right now with the legislature because we know some of those housing bills will pass this session. On a general level for that. We are waiting for the fine details to actually come out of. We were tracking some bills, one example of one was a bill that in the name of affordable housing, basically said that any tree protections could be handled by paying into a tree bank. Those monies could be used elsewhere, not to be required. That one was radically rewritten. The first reading of the bill and the substitute version, a lot different. So I'm kind of waiting for all of that to settle before we decide we really got to pay attention to this. The other thing is we're also looking at the timelines for some. I anticipate that we're not going to be dealing with a lot of the stuff happening this year as part of the update process. We won't have to. Number one, we're a year behind the Central Puget Sound cities updating their plans. And if they're that far along, they're not going to be able to incorporate this. So we'll see when this sort of stuff is going to be actually required. If we can, if it makes sense, we'll incorporate it before, but I don't think we'll be under pressure to do so. So I'm just waiting to see what the final legislation.
So, any other points on legislation type thing? Glad you're following that. All right then. Thanks, Brad, for that discussion. It looks like our next meeting date is going to be March 14th, and that will be a joint meeting with the tree board again. And it will probably be a hybrid again. I know some of the members there in particular are Zoom only. We're making a special effort to try to sort out the talking times. All right. Any other points for the good of the order? Is there a motion? Commissioner Tobias.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, thank you. Second. Seconded by Vice Chair Sullivan. Any parting comments? All right, everybody in favor of adjourning tonight, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Discussion.
Let's do tapping and expertise of the tree board.
Yeah. Oh, like in tapping a maple?
I don't